Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 4th, 2021 meeting of the Raleigh City Council Study Group. As our first order of business, I want to go ahead and ask if everybody's had a chance to review the May 26th meeting minutes. And if you have any corrections, comments, revisions to those. And if there are no changes, then I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes. Weeks.
Okay, we got a motion by Councilor Weeks. Do you have a second?
A second.
Second.
Diana.
Second by Diana. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Seeing none, okay, we'll go ahead and the minutes are approved. I wanted to make one comment. We had a lot of discussion actually at our last meeting about the pace of our meetings, and one of the things I wanted to point out on our kind of original work plan, we had approximated 9 to 10 meetings for completing our work, and this will be our 9th meeting. And also, I took a look back at the Charlotte group when they did their work. And again, we're not necessarily having to duplicate what they did, but they met 10 times. So yeah, I think we're doing fine on our meeting pace. And I don't think that we're, other than this interim report, I think we're on a reasonable pace. I don't think we're really rushing anything. So I just wanted to point that out because I went back and took a look at it. And to kind of review a little bit like we've been doing our last meeting, what we generally agreed to take a look today at 2 approaches to compensation, and we agreed to go ahead and make an interim report to City Council at their June 15th meeting. And at that meeting, the 3 it would basically be an update of status report of where we are and to report out the 3 issues that we've reached consensus on, which was the 4-year terms, staggering, and presumably today, whatever we decide in terms of compensation. And then we'll also obviously update them on where we are on the remaining 2 issues and take any direction from council, obviously, if they have any for us. So I think that's where we are. And then with regard to council elections, the legislation, it's Senate Bill 722. As I understand it, yesterday, the Senate voted 46-0 to approve the bill. And so it's moved on to the House for their action. And it's not clear at this point how quickly they will take action on it, but it appears that it will move forward and be approved, and that would put Raleigh on track for the March 8th, 2022 election. So that appears to be where it's going. I don't know much about how legislation works at the General Assembly, but that's my understanding. So we'll assume that and keep moving forward. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of that before we move into the work of the day? And please feel free to interrupt me. I'm because of this new setup using my old computer, I'm having to look at notes a little differently, so I can't necessarily see everybody. So if I don't recognize you, just holler at me and we'll go ahead and move on. So the two approaches we had to compensation were taking the average of the 3 highest compensated, and we were just looking at the stipends, not the expense allowances. The 3 highest stipends for North Carolina jurisdiction and averaging them to see where we were. And then also we agreed to adjust the mayor's stipend, our general expense allowance to $4,000 and councils to $3,000. And then the car expense allowance for the mayor would remain at $1,800, and for council, $1,200. It was not obvious to me, and we may not have discussed it with regard to the technology allowance. It didn't appear from the information I had that the mayor received a technology allowance, but council members did. And so I went ahead and assumed that we would also add $504 to the council's, to the mayor's allowance for technology. It didn't appear that she received one, probably because I'm saying she because we have because of the current mayor, but didn't appear to me that the mayor received the $504. I assumed in my numbers, I went ahead and added that in. So I'll pull up the spreadsheet to share, hopefully, and then we can talk about kind of where everything fell out. Hopefully this works for everybody. I assume everybody can see my screen. If you don't have it, okay. So, and what I did, we also talked about assuming using the Charlotte, and this is the council member sheet. We assumed that Charlotte was going to adjust their council compensation up. So I used the new compensation for that for Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. And so when we took the averages of the three highest, which would also then, and then add in the expense allowances, you can see over here that, well, I'll go ahead, sorry. We had the second approach, which was, since we're looking at the spreadsheet, the second approach was to average the top 5 jurisdiction stipend and then add 20% to that. And then again, keep the same allowances. And you can see where in both circumstances, under either formula, Raleigh would be in the number 3 spot. You take out the Charlotte, the old or their current compensation here, and with Charlotte's new proposed compensation, Mecklenburg, then under either one, Raleigh would be number 3 in terms of total compensation, and they would be in terms of the stipend alone, under the averaging the 5 with a 20% bump would be actually the highest for the stipend, but then it would drop back down after the allowances are added in. And then you can see where Raleigh would be, or currently is, on council members. So they're way down on the list. So having said that, let's does anybody have comments or thoughts about how these two approaches line up? Do you prefer one or the other over the other, or some other concept that we haven't talked about?
So Eric, I like that. I find it encouraging that these numbers are kind of in the ballpark of each other and they're very similar. And then also from some of the materials that we were looking at in preparation for today, that fiscal year 2021 employee compensation and benefits recommendation report that was circulated puts the living wage for 2021 in Raleigh at $34,130. So these are all kind of, I think, tracking with not just those helpful averages and where Raleigh kind of is situated across the North Carolina peer cities, but those are also numbers that are consistent with, I think, some good Raleigh specific benchmarks, which I know is something that Ashton brought up last session.
That's a good point. I hadn't noticed that, but that, and then so the averaging the top 3 puts it right at, like you said, right at the ballpark, and the other version bumps it up a little bit. I tend to like the idea of keeping it close to the living wage, but again, I'd like to hear from other folks. because remember today we're hoping to make a decision. So I need some direction, or what the group does on these two numbers or some combination.
Hi, Eric. This is Justin Sutton. I am also in line with the proposal for the upper quadrant of the top three average, that 34,552, as consistent with the living wage standard and what is proposed for fiscal year 2021. My question: where did the 20%? Where did we come up with that 20% bump up or step up?
Justin, that was my suggestion, and
Okay.
Not a whole lot of thought went into it at the time that we had this conversation the last time we met. I was simply trying to get a larger group of communities and counties included in the list, and then took a number, 20%. It could have been 10, it could have been 15, it could have been 30, to make certain that we were putting Raleigh in the nearer the top than the bottom of the average, or above average of those five. But it was a peg number, not one
Gotcha.
that I had a significant rationale. I was just looking for a way to add more communities into the conversation rather than just the top three, thinking that we might get some pushback for just taking the top three. But I'm not wedded to that approach at all.
Thank you, Harvey. I appreciate that.
This is Weeks. I agree with Catherine and Justin's comments on this, and I agree that I'll go along with the top three average here.
This is Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I couldn't. Who was that? Was that Diana?
This is Diana. I just wanted to say that I am in agreement with Justin and Catherine and Weeks with the top three. I'm in agreement with that.
Well, let me ask the other way. Does anybody? It sounds like the averaging the top three is trending towards kind of where people want to go. Does anybody object to that, or have concerns about that number or that approach?
I feel like object is a bit of a strong word to say, but I like where Harvey's coming at it from the idea that looking at Raleigh's growth pattern and the trajectory of the city, that should we be slightly above average, and then how we get there, I don't know. But for me, that's something worth considering. And I appreciate Catherine bringing up the living wage number as well. I think the lowest and just for context, the lowest full-time salary in Raleigh is that living wage number at $34,130, I think. And our from police and firefighters, I think the lowest annual salary there is, I think, $38,900. I can pull the number and double check. But again, just to provide some context as to how we are compensating elected officials versus, emergency personnel in the city.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind, couple considerations. The Mecklenburg number that's last fiscal year. And so some of these numbers, that number may change. Generally speaking, they're not, at least the pattern I've seen, jurisdictions, other than having a kind of an annual adjustment that is typical of what their employees get, jurisdictions are not doing wholesale adjustments every year. So it's Charlotte is a kind of a unique, and I guess Raleigh is too now. It seems that they go for 3 to 6 years, and then one of the elected officials, I guess, has the political courage to say, hey, I think we need to look at how we're being compensated, and then they do kind of a significant adjustment. So I don't think these numbers will change, but we are just trying to peg a number that we think is reasonable within the context of a fast-growing city. So I don't know that we need to have a perfectly logical and scientific approach to this. And I think either one of these numbers is reasonable. I don't think they're certainly out of whack compared to the other jurisdictions. And so I'm fine if we think we should kind of vary from this somewhat, and then it'll get adjusted. One of the other things I had to raise was, do we also want to recommend, because again, when to do these kind of reevaluations, really look at where the jurisdiction is, the only way that happens is if council decides to do it. And given the political climate, that's probably, I have never sat in their chair before, but I suspect it's pretty difficult to raise your hand and say, hey, I don't think we're getting paid enough for what we do. And so part of what I was going to talk about was, is it worth in our recommendation to suggest that council build into the ordinance, I guess it would be, and maybe the city attorneys can weigh in if I'm off base here. Could we put in the ordinance where it establishes the allowances, something that says that, council's going to use either the formula we adopt, or something that says they're going to reevaluate their compensation every 3 years or every 5 years, so that there's a mechanism in place and it's not a political decision, and they can point to the ordinance and say, this is the third year of our, we have to take a look at this, or direct staff to look at it or something. I don't know if that makes sense as well.
Yeah, I think I'm generally aligned with adding that in there as well. I guess for me, I would want to, and I know we can't be perfectly scientific about this, but I would want to be able to include some version of the formula that we use, so that there's at least a reference point, for how that gets calculated every couple of years.
Well, one thing we could do, if people think the 38 is a little high and the 34 is a little low, we could do the average and do a 10%. And that would, I don't know what the math would be on that. I'm not a math person, but that would relate to just the stipend, which is $29,840.
Yeah, if you use the top three and a 10% addition, that'll take you to $32,825.
And then you add the, what is it, the
allowances,
3,000 and 1,200 and the 504. Sorry, you're having to listen to me. That would be 37,528. So yeah, and I agree. I'd like to have some sort of formula, that we used. Harvey?
Eric, when I calculate the top three average against, let's say Charlotte is our benchmark. They're the largest city in the market in the state. We're the second largest city in the state. The 34,000 represents about 68%. 34,000 is 68% of 52,000, and 38,000 is about 73% of $52,000. So if we're trying to have some sort of relationship to the top, and I don't know what the population difference is. We're at 500,000 and they're at about 800 million. So I don't know whether 68 or 73 is a good number percentage-wise. if that's a rational breaking point.
I mean, I think we're at numbers. I mean, so we got to just, you know, I'm personally fine with, I mean, we've got three options. We've got the 34, we've got the 37, and we got 38, you know, which rationale are we most comfortable with? We can do the top three with a 10% bump. We could do I haven't done it, but the top five with 10% bump, where would that put us? Does anybody know that off the top of their head? I don't have that math in front of me because we'd be backing it down by.
You said top five with 10%.
Yeah, so if we took the top five average, so I guess you'd take 33,561 and take 90% of it. Is that the right way to do that? And again, I'm not a math person at all.
Adding 10% would put you at 36,911.
Well, we did the top five with 20%, so that 33,561.
Oh, sorry.
So I think we'd back down by 10%. Is that the right way to do that?
So the question
Yep,
may
and that
not,
gets you at 3020.
so the question may not just be on stipend, it may be on the expense allowance. We're putting in 3,000, and Charlotte and Mecklenburg have upwards of almost 10. So if you wanted to adjust to get it in a greater alignment, you can make a case for either the top five or the top three, but bumping up your council member annual expenses to be more in line with our peer community.
The only, I mean, again, we're just talking about formulas. The only thing I think about those is so many of the communities don't have them at all. You know, I'd rather have the formula get us close to the number rather than the expenses. But again, at the end of the day, we're coming up with a number, and I'd like to, you know, we need a number and some rationale that we can provide to council, and in theory, if the group agrees, also suggest that they kind of revisit it every few years to make sure they haven't fallen behind, you know, peer jurisdictions. Because clearly right now, at least in my opinion, and I think most people think, we've fallen behind. And so I guess I'm going to push everybody to go ahead, Ashley.
I'm inclined to want to consider a higher stipend and fewer allowances. And my thinking behind that, at least initially, is related to some of the childcare conversations that we've had and the other things. And, you know, stuff like transportation may not necessarily be covered in some of these things. So at least at this point, I'm inclined to say that if we have a higher stipend and fewer allowances, council members are able to choose how they spend that higher stipend to whatever suits their family situation.
Yeah, I'm just looking at optics, and right now Charlotte's new is at 32,638 for stipend. Mecklenburg's with 29, almost 30,000. So if we bump the stipend up, then we're exceeding Charlotte, and depending upon how it's reported, it may be viewed as we're overstepping. I like using the total compensation number because the total compensation number is a more relative relationship between our peer city and commission. But you know, I don't know how much we need to pay attention to politics or to the optics, and how much we need to just get to a reasonable number. I'm happy with either of these two approaches, but I am inclined to go for the Raleigh top three and adjust somewhat on the allowance side And so that's for what it's worth.
Do others, we've got kind of a quiet crowd today. You know, my sense would be taking the top three with the 10% number, and that gets us at 57,528. I mean, I'm sorry, 37,528. And the reason, and I guess it's kind of along the lines of what Ashton's talking about on the expenses, I think they're paid regardless. But you know, I'm one of these people that if I see that, hey, you get an auto allowance, you know, my sense is that's kind of what it's intended to be for, you know, and so if I'm not using it, you know, so if we're gonna, if people think we should play with these numbers, then my sense is, you know, we kind of, and if you have an annual allowance and they get paid regardless because it says shall, to me that's just, you know, let's just be upfront about it. If we think our folks should be paid X amount, you know, then that's what we ought to stand up and say. I mean, this is kind of, since they're automatically paid because the ordinance says shall, to me, it's kind of, you know, and I'm sure they're all the same way. It's a bit of window dressing. And, you know, this is the number that matters at the end of the day to me. And if we, as a group, whatever the number is, if we think that, you know, being one of the fastest growing cities in now the most populous county in the state, if we think we need to be near the top, then I think that's what our logic is. You know, we looked at these other jurisdictions and this is what we think. So I'm tending to think that I'm kind of falling in line with the averaging the 3 plus the 10% to get us to the 37,528. But again, we just need a number that people are comfortable with and a formula that gets us there. So, and I guess while we're thinking about that, I don't think it matters. Let's look at the mayor as well, just in the context of what we're talking about. Maybe that makes sense as well. So using the same methodology for mayor, you can see on the top three averaging came out at 42,215, or the stipend was 36,511. The top five with the 20% was 4782. This middle is the current Charlotte or the old Charlotte compensation. So again, under either, I thought it was interesting, under both formulas, using either one, the mayor would be still be in the number 3 position in terms of total compensation, with the 5%, I mean the 5 with the 20%, about $5,000 more. So I guess let's look at what the number would be if we did the 10% onto the mayor. That would be 36,511. For the mayor, that would put the stipend at 4162, I think. And if somebody can check my math to make sure I'm not doing that incorrectly, and then if you add the stipends in, that would end up being 45,866. So you're just below the 47, still in the top 3.
Hi, Eric. This is Justin Sutton. That top 3 average, that included the Charlotte new proposed stipend, Mecklenburg County, and what was the third one based on this chart?
the average, the top three I took would have been, I don't remember, but it was whatever the top three jurisdictions were averaged, and then 10%. So again, it's not going to move tremendously one way or the other.
Eric, I like taking the top three jurisdictions, adding a 10%, and then averaging that out. I think that that's rational. It's connecting us to our peer cities, and the results seem to be in line with what I think normatively our council members ought to be making for the work that they do for the city. And I'm also not concerned about overweighting the stipend as opposed to the allowances. I think you're right that the overall amount is what is going to matter the most. And if we feel like we want to compensate them for the work that they do, I have no problem going out and justifying that. So I think that's where I'm at the moment.
This is,
Okay.
I agree wholeheartedly with that comment.
So it sounds like we've got three with using the average of the 3 plus 10%. The others, and again, I think assuming we agree, the recommendation to council is going to be a number. And then our justification will be, here's how we arrived at it. And then if we want to go a step further and recommend that as part of this, we recommend they adopt, revisiting it on every 3 years, I think 3, but no more than 5 years, and using the same formula. I think that's a step further than I think we initially talked about. So the first step would be, recommendation would be, here's a number that we think is reasonable and consistent with what elected officials in a fast-growing city like Raleigh should be paid. They may or may not ask, what the rationale is. I suppose and assume that we'll put the rationale in the memo that we are going to deliver to them. But at the end of the day, it is really a number and not a formula. So, if we, and to have some logic behind it, but whether we are another $2,000, I mean, when you look at the two top jurisdictions, we're still not, there. So I don't think anybody can, somebody can make the argument, but I don't think any of the numbers we're talking about are going to seem excessive to anybody that's rational and that's looking at this in any fair sense. So I think we just need to decide, is the top three plus 10% reasonable to everybody, or but we gotta draw some consensus around it. So maybe I just we may have to just go around the room. I don't know, or the virtual room. But do we have other thoughts?
For what it's worth, the total compensation for the mayor would be around $46,000 under this scenario.
I've got 45,866, unless my math is wrong, which is.
Oh, that's right. 46,000 in round numbers.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't off.
It increases the mayor's stipend to $40,162.
Yeah.
Eric, this is Beth. I agree with that approach.
Ashton, I can't remember now. We've gone back and forth. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I think we're getting to a place where we're kind of splitting small amounts of money to find the right solution. And I think this is a clean and easy kind of way to talk about it and to rationalize it. So yeah, I would be supportive.
So Diana, we haven't heard you for a little bit. What are your thoughts?
I think she's muted.
She's muted. Okay. Diana, I'm calling on you. See what your thoughts are. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Hold on, Dr. West, hold on. I'm sorry, I was on the call with Dr. West at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're the power.
I've been
you're the power
listening.
player today.
I'm multitasking here. But I am still with that top three. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Are you okay with the 10% bump that we're
Yes.
talking about? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
I would still lean on my previous proposal, or how I guess the top three average. Just trying to reasonably justify the 10%. I mean, I know it's rather menial. I think it's a nominal amount, about 1,000 or so, but just to be as objective as possible based on the data and the numbers here, I would just be consistent with the top three average.
Okay. Did I get everybody that's in the group? Have I missed anyone that hasn't commented? I don't think I have. So Justin, I guess it comes down to you. It sounds like you're kind of the outlier, which is okay. But we've tried to work from consensus, the whole time. And I kind of don't want us to leave anybody out or leave somebody with lingering doubts, or so is there some other than
To Justin's point, the problem I had after I opened up the conversation about top 5 plus 20 is, how do you justify the 10%? What's the rationale for the 10%? So, I mean, if you want to get to that number without having to justify a 10% number, you've got justification by looking at the annual expense numbers and putting those higher, because that is what Charlotte has done. That would be one way to solve that dilemma.
Well, let me ask, Justin, would you be more comfortable? Is it the total number that you're, and I'm saying uncomfortable. I don't think is it the total number or the process? So that if we went back to averaging the top three and then bump the allowances some to get kind of close to that final number, would that make you feel better in terms of is it the rationale of how we get to a number, or is it the number itself?
It's not the number. I guess it's just the rationale and the justification for each expense. And again, I know the public service is a sacrifice. So keeping that in mind, in the spirit of the job itself, and if that is, I guess, ample or sufficient to cover our elected officials' expenses, I would say we keep it based on what we've projected here. And I guess we're just pulling that from the data that we have in front of us.
Well, what if and this is to the whole group, if you look at the auto allowance, the annual expense is just a number, really just number. We could audit the 1,200 auto allowance is pretty low relative to the folks that have auto allowances. Carrie, I think, is the most interesting. They have a tiny stipend and pretty ginormous auto allowance. And I'm not suggesting we go there, but we, you know, if we kept with the average of the top three and adjusted the auto allowance for both, you know, added or doubled that or added 1,000 to that, would that, again, I just want to have logic to the number and get a reasonable number. Would people be able to get behind something like that?
Can you remind us what's under that auto umbrella? Is that just any car, even vehicular related expense, or is it kind of more prescriptive than that?
I mean, as I understand these are paid out with the stipend number because the ordinance says shall be paid. So I think, like I said in the beginning,
Okay.
I think they're just numbers and the counselors get it, whether they spend it or not. Is that,
Okay.
and I guess I'm asking the city attorney's office or to weigh in on that, but it appears to me they just get these payments.
I assume so. I have an auto allowance and I just get it lumped in with my check. So I assume they do it the same way.
Yeah.
Checks to make sure I use it for my car or whatever.
And here's
Okay.
what the ordinance
Thank you.
says. The ordinance says the mayor shall be paid an additional sum of $100 per month and shall be an allowance for all expenses. So it's shall, and it says on a monthly basis. So they don't really have to justify it. Again, they are just numbers that they get regardless from the ordinance. So if we could get around to address Justin's concern, and assuming he's okay with just adding to this auto allowance, it would get us all to a higher number, but maybe have more logic and actually transparency to it. But what do folks feel about that? And Justin, is that better for you in terms of the justification?
If we adjusted that auto allowance or either one of those expenses, and if it's absolutely necessary or justified, you know, as aligned with the budget, yeah, I would be fine with that.
So what if we kept the average and doubled the auto allowance to 2,400? I think that would still get us in the same universe of numbers, and we wouldn't kind of have the arbitrary 10% bump. And sounds like that would get Justin comfortable. And would the rest of the group feel okay about that in that range and approach?
So going back to the original 10% number, which would have been an extra $3,600 in the case of the mayor. To get there, you could do it by adding $1,200 to the auto allowance and another couple $1,000s to the annual expense allowance. And you've, in essence, got the number that you started with before, and it's still $3,000 less than Charlotte or Mecklenburg on the expense items in both cases.
And Eric, this is Beth. In my mind, sort of that 10% was not only to acknowledge the size and growth in our community and the prominence of the capital city, but also to address the things we had sort of talked about with expenses that council members may have, for instance, childcare expenses and other things that we wanted to be proactive about, but not necessarily call out as an individual line item. So for me, that was sort of the justification for the additional 10%.
So, and I hear you, and I think others have raised the point. I guess I'm trying to get us to all coalesce around an approach and a number.
I think we can all coalesce around the idea that Raleigh's 10% better than Charlotte.
Well, if we're doing that, then we can probably go beyond 10%. But since these numbers are paid out and they don't require a justification, you don't have to bring your auto expenses or anything, you know, we can adjust these to get to that number. We can use the 10%. I guess I'm asking now for people to kind of compromise on it sounds like we're okay with the numbers. It's the formula to get there. And so I think I'm going to nudge us to say it's 9:19. We got people that got to drop off at 9:30 and 10. We're okay with the numbers. So I think it sounds like we're okay with kind of that 10% bump number.
Right.
The question is, how do we get there? So
Eric,
we had.
I just want to let you know, I confirm with Lou that all of it's just put in the paycheck.
Okay.
That's correct.
So, you know, we gotta agree on an approach. That's where we are now. I think it sounds to me like the number we talked about, the general universe, was the average of the top three plus 10%. I'm comfortable with that. We had some folks that weren't comfortable with that. So
I think Harvey's math was a good start for how we get there across all of the allowances. I mean, I think that does address some of the other concerns that we brought up around childcare and technology and those kinds of things. So I do think that maybe just increasing all three of the allowances would help us get there.
Beth, does that, given what we've heard about the way they're paid out, does that address the kind of the concern about how, you know, the child care issue and other potential expenses that folks have that are not covered in those categories?
That's fine with me.
I have no objection.
Okay, so then Harvey, the math you did was to add 2,000 to, and this is the mayor, and then we'll go to council, was to add 2,000 to the general expense allowance and double the auto allowance.
Correct. That gets you at about $3,200 versus $3,600. So it's conceivable you could round up the technology allowance to $1,000 and call it a day.
And ours is pretty low relative to everybody else's. How are folks with that?
I do like round numbers.
Like,
Agreed.
agree.
Okay, then let's go to the mayor. Let's go back to council real quick and see with the top three. Do we just do the same thing? I can't remember where they fell out, Harvey, or somebody that's doing the math, if they can help me.
So figure $31,000 would be the Raleigh average top three plus 10%. So that is $3,000. If you add 500 to the technology expense, 1,200 to the auto allowance, and then whatever the difference is. So that's 1,700. You add another $1,000 to the annual expense, maybe a little bit more, so it's not completely out of sync with the mayor. That could get you there.
So the only thing I would say there is I would keep the technology at 1,000 for both, because I think there's really no difference between what a mayor would do and a council member would do in terms of technology. And I would adjust, I think, you know, the mayor is more likely to do, you know, have to go to dinners and things like that, more than the council. And so I'm okay with having the mayor have a larger general expense allowance than council. So if we double the auto, 1,000 for tech, what do we need on the general allowance, Harvey, to get us where we
roughly $1,000.
So then that would put, then,
Yeah, it's actually about 1,300 if I'm thinking quickly in my head.
well, to do round numbers, I think let's do, if it's okay, let's do 4,000 for annual expense, 2,400 for car, and 1,000 for tax. Plus and then just so I'm clear, then we're just taking the stipend is going to be the average of the top three, plus these adjusted numbers. Is that what where we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask for folks to essentially acknowledge, vote that this is our approach. And rather than ask for everybody to approve it, does anybody object to that? Okay, well, it sounds like we've reached consensus on compensation. Again, unless folks have concerns at this point. Counselor Weeks?
I agree with the approach, and since I got the lead, also you made a statement concerning the rationale in our report. I agree that we should have that rationale as a footnote at the bottom of our report, and that was enhanced the city council, not to question what we're, in a way, not to question what we came up with. So I agree we should have that rationale in our final report to the city council.
So before you leave, what do you think about also recommending that we put somewhere in the report that we recommend they revisit? My sense is every 3 years, the stipend amount based on the formula we're using to make sure that they still are in line with where we think we ought to be, so that they're not forced to. I mean, you've been in this situation, so it doesn't rely on a council member to kind of talk to each other and say, hey, it's time to adjust our compensation. Now they'll still get the annual adjustment they would normally get, but then every 3 years, again, I'm open to 5, they would take kind of a broader look using the average that we've talked about maybe. Is that something you're okay with?
Yes, I would go along with the 3. I think the 5 would be too far out. I think every 3 years would be the approach that I would use. Right.
Do other people have thoughts on that? Should we endeavor to do that, or should we leave it at rest?
Yeah,
go ahead,
Eric.
Catherine.
Yeah, I think we should stick with either a 2 or 4 year instead of 3 or 5, because if you do it with an odd number, that means that sometimes it'll happen in an election year and it won't be consistent with who
Gotcha.
is having to
Oh,
defend
okay.
this during an election year. So I suggest that we do either 2 or 4 years, and we recommend that it happen in the non-election year. So that's just to minimize the possibility that they're going to have to answer for this, even if it's built into the statute.
This is Weeks.
Aligned with that.
I like the point that she just brought up, and I agree with that. I didn't think about the 2 and 4, but yes, I agree with your comments on it.
2 seems too frequent. 4 seems okay to me. What about just going with 4? Again, they can change this. They're not, we're just trying to make some suggestion that gives them some ability to do it regularly. I didn't get the sense that folks are changing their, the cities are changing their approaches that often, but I can go 2 or 4. So what do others think?
I agree with 4.
Okay,
I think 4 makes the
I
most
agree with 4.
sense.
Yes.
And yeah, in off election years, especially if we're proposing staggered terms, I think that.
okay.
Yeah, I go with 4.
All right.
Okay, so I think we have consensus on that, unless somebody objects or that I haven't heard from. Okay, well, that I think gets us through compensation. Am I missing anything, leaving anything out that we
Eric,
need?
I'm confused. Where did you finally land? Which line?
On the adjustment or the numbers overall?
The numbers overall. We're not sure where you finally landed.
Okay. In each case, so for the mayor, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, in case I messed it up, we're gonna take the average of the top 3 jurisdictions, which was, my number was 29,848. And then the allowances are gonna be adding, so the mayor's allowance would be 5,000.
And Eric,
No.
the total comp number you just read, I think is council member total comp number, not mayor, right?
Yeah, I'm going back now to look at mayor. So
Okay,
Harvey, what did we say on the mayor? We were going to double it to.
Put the mayor on the screen so we're all looking at the same.
I
think it'd be
oh, I'm
good
sorry. I'm
actual
sorry.
numbers. It would be help me.
Yeah, would it be helpful to write it out on the screen as we do it?
Yeah, but that's not,
So bottom line there, it was $1,000 for it would be 36,511, then $1,000 for the technology, 2,400 for the auto allowance, and that is, and then another 2,000, or was it 1,500 be 2,000?
it was 2,000 for to add 2,000. So the total for the general allowance would be 6,000.
Correct.
Technology would be round number at 1,000. And we were going to double the autos to 2,400.
Correct.
So that would be, you'd add 9,400 to 36,511.
Yeah, so your total comes to 45,911.
45,911. And so so that's for the mayor. And so our recommendation would be that number, those numbers, and then we would say, going forward, we recommend every 4 years, council use the same formula in terms of the stipend to adjust. And they can do whatever they want with the technology. I mean, we don't have a formula for that. So are you, Robin, are you straight on that one?
Yeah, okay, yes, okay. I just want to make sure everybody knows what numbers we're talking about, and
No, I appreciate it.
and then the council, what's the council for those same things, for the salary, general, technology, and
yeah, so stipend is 29,848, which is the average of the top 3. And then we were going to do 4,000 for the annual expense allowance, 2,400 for the auto allowance, and 1,000 for the technology. Is that what everybody understands?
Correct.
And so that
Which brings us to 37,248.
Correct. It's not quite 3%, but or 10%, but it's a whisker away.
So we're going to recommend those numbers, and then the formula as the justification and how we would recommend that they reevaluate every 4 years to ensure that they are still in the top tier kind of total compensation. And then I wanted to touch on does anybody have any more issues about that, or questions, concerns? And we have our regular meeting on Wednesday, just to make sure everybody's clear on that. So in terms of the report, I had a brief conversation with the chief of staff, and I was talking about, since everything's electronic now and COVID and stuff, I was talking to him about bundling everything together, and he said that council's savvy now with technology, and all of our records are on board docs. So when they post to board docs, all of our attachments are posted, the spreadsheets there, all of our minutes. So there was no need to really bundle anything in one place. So what my thinking is, and we have to get whatever written document to him by Wednesday at noon, so it can be included in the packet. My sense of this is to do a very brief memo that just lays out what we've done, the number of meetings we've had, and the rationale in terms of the objective approach to like compensation. But I don't want to, at least my sense is, I don't want to try to characterize our conversations and kind of, you know, in terms of the 4 years and the staggering, it's too hard to kind of make sure I encompass the entire conversation. So my sense was to be brief and then, you know, refer them to the minutes of our discussions, and all our meetings are recorded. And so if they want to really delve into kind of where we were and how we got where we got, they, you know, I'm less comfortable trying to characterize our conversations, and because my view is I may characterize or overemphasize something that others think are, you know, points are less important. Does that sound reasonable to everyone, that something more brief and then, you know, as factual as I can make it without kind of characterizing anything, Harvey?
Yeah, so
And
I'm okay with brief, and I understand, since we're not reviewing an annual report or a final report, to get across the board buy-in on language, etc. So reasonably brief. It does seem to me, however, if we're going through this process to make certain that they get this in enough time so that it's actionable on their behalf, if they want that flexibility, that we need to be specific enough about the things that we have come to concurrence on or consensus on, which are 4 years, which is staggered terms, which is at large on one cycle and districts on the other, and that we do have a specific recommendation on compensation. And
no, that, not to cut you off, that's exactly what I propose to do, and I will do my best to get something out to the group. I'm slow at stuff, but I'd like to think I can get something out to the group Monday. But, you know, to be very specific, and I was going to confirm again today, you know, here are the things we've reached consensus on, and be clear on that, because we've reached consensus. I was talking more about trying to characterize and summarize how we got to each of those conclusions, because I think we all got to those in different ways, and maybe we all view kind of certain different aspects of how we got there more important and give more weight to it. And so, you know, the attorney in me, I don't want to mischaracterize or overemphasize or underemphasize something that might be more important to somebody else on the committee. So what I was trying to convey is, I would be the 4 areas we've reached consensus on. I'm essentially going to say we met 9 times. It'll be 10, I guess. Here are the topics we discussed. Here's our approach was to reach consensus on every recommendation. To date, we've reached consensus on these, you know, the staggering, the 4-year terms, how to stagger, compensation, and the rationale for compensation. And then the outstanding items are size of council, makeup of council, whether whatever size would be at large or district, and enhancing voter turnout. We're still in the process of addressing those and meeting, and we will, issue a final report upon completion of those items. So yes, be very specific on the things we've reached consensus on, and make sure that council understands that those are unanimous. You know, we go into this, you know, together on those items. So that's all I'm saying. No, I'm not planning on being wishy-washy about where we've reached consensus. It was more avoiding kind of characterizing, you know, the discussion, how we got where we got, because I think everybody has their own view of what's important and which aspects are more important than others. And so that at that point, I would defer to the minutes of the meetings and the recordings, and they can, to the extent they are interested in really understanding how we got there in depth, they can do the homework themselves and look at the minutes and take away from that whatever they choose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Eric, I agree that's fine. Particularly, I think it's the benefit of us taking a consensus-based approach. You know, whereas for Charlotte, they recorded the actual like vote breakdowns of the different topics they discussed. It makes sense in that situation to actually go in depth and summarize all of the kind of the various positions and discussions and debates. But when we're coming to council with essentially unanimous recommendation on those points, I think giving them, here's the result we reached, here, you know, here's what you asked us to look at, here's what we reached as our conclusions, and here's what we're still doing. I think that makes total sense.
Okay, well then, that's the way we'll proceed. I had that we might start talking about some of these other issues, but I think that I don't see any need to delve into that here for 10 minutes or so, especially since we've got a couple members that either dropped off or couldn't attend today. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, and just a reminder, we are going to have our regular meeting on Wednesday at noon, and we'll keep powering through, and the topic will be size of council and district versus at large, to the extent there's interest in expanding the size. Although we can talk about it, I mean, we can talk about enhancing voter turnout. We can flip-flop if folks want to. There's no method to our madness, so I guess I'd ask for a little bit of input on which topic y'all would prefer to delve into next time. If there's any reason to do one or the other. I think our original timeline was size first and then turnout last, but I'm fine flip-flopping that if there's interest in doing it the other way.
Eric, for what it's worth, on the generating voter turnout, the voter turnout changed to some extent when the city and the county, or the county and the school board had their elections moved into even years. When they were in odd years, we had all three of the city, the county, and the school board. So it ginned up the number of people that showed up at the polls. I'd be interested if staff could get us some information about how much poll percentage dropped when we took the city and put it on a cycle separate from the county and the city, the county and the school board and state and national. I think we only have one real strategy in terms of generating greater turnout, and that's ultimately going to be moving onto the same cycle as everybody else and getting a flush of all of the voters out. I have been generally thinking it's a good idea to allow the municipal issues to get attention, but they get attention.
You're going, I'm good with if we can get data. Let's be specific on, I assume voter turnout data is relatively available. I don't know.
That's something you should probably talk. I don't know if Jerry Cohen's here today, but the Board of Elections, that's going to be their data, not our data.
He was on, but so Harvey, in a perfect world, I guess what are you saying? could we get voter turnout data on municipal elections and county commission and school board? When did the General Assembly make that change? I don't recall when it was.
They made that change effective 4 years ago. They made it while I was still working. And it was designed to try and increase voter participation for county and school related issues.
So I'm trying to I want to get specific direction as to what data we would want. So starting, if y'all will help me, starting in what year would we like to see? I guess we'd like to see turnout for county commission and school board going back, and city council going back how many years? So I just want to, so to the extent either I got to dig it up or staff or somebody, or I got to ask for it, I want to know exactly what we're asking for, if you can help me.
So I was thinking maybe 4 cycles prior to 4 years ago. And then
So that would put it at what, help me with years.
general election was last year, so
I understand what you want. I mean, I can talk to Jerry about it and just find out what's the difference when we were separated out from everybody else. That's the question, right?
right. What's the trend line here? So
Yeah.
when everybody used to be together, it was X, now it's X minus. And
Well, we know that the percentage turnout now when we're by ourselves is very low. It's like 5% or something like that. So I'll see what I'll see what I can find out. How about that?
Okay, and if we could get that possible for Wednesday, I know that's kind of short notice, but we could then talk about the turnout issue versus the council size, but we'll just take it as it comes. So if you'll please give some thought for homework for next time, and you can look at this. I'd encourage you to refer back to the spreadsheet in terms of size of other jurisdictions. Also keep in mind that state law limits the size of council, I believe maximum 12 council members and a mayor. So the largest you could have is 13, and I am not suggesting anything, that's just a factual statement, not a suggestion that we even want to go in that direction. And I always get confused if it's 12 council and a mayor or 11 council and a mayor. Robin, do you know that's top of yours? Is it the max of?
I think it's a total of 12, including the mayor. Is that right, Janie? Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, I think that is correct. That it's the
Okay.
Yeah, I think it could be 12 if I'm correct.
Okay, so the largest we could have.
You're talking.
Okay, it says large council can't exceed 12, and it's never clear to me whether they mean council including the mayor. So anyway, just as a top line number, I wanted people to keep that in mind. And so take a look at what other jurisdictions are doing. And I'd also encourage you to think about, to the extent anybody's thinking about adding district representatives, keep in mind how fast the city's growing relative to what adding a district would do in terms of population size of the district, and kind of the principles we talked about also, which are do we, as a group or whatever your personal view is, do you value an elected body taking kind of the broader approach to growth or not growth, but the city and policies versus a more localized approach, and what you want out of your elected officials. So just if you can do that, and again, refer back to the spreadsheet, because there's a lot of, I think, useful information in that as well. Are there any other comments, thoughts on that, or approach to take for Wednesday, or anything else?
Hi, Eric. Excuse me. This
Hey,
is
Justin.
Justin.
Yep.
I guess for next week with the voter participation and the voter engagement, I'd like to, I guess, have a deeper discussion from the, I guess, the inverse, or looking at the candidate's perspective in terms of access and visibility to the voters. So I guess we can have a deeper discussion with more time on Wednesday.
So is your preference, I'm not sure what you're asking, which topic would you prefer to focus on Wednesday?
Well, we can stick with the scheduled agenda. We can discuss in time permitting.
Okay. Okay, and yeah, that's why we're going to have more, instead of today, we'll have more time to delve into it. And I want us to consider every aspect of the issue, and so I don't want to rush this at all. So I will endeavor to get a brief memo out to everybody by Monday. If you staff needs it by lunchtime on Wednesday, so if you can give me any comments you have as soon as possible, that would be helpful. And I'll do my best to incorporate them. But at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty objective, and hopefully there won't be too much that we have to quibble over. But I certainly encourage everybody to share any concerns you have. So with that, thank you for joining us here on a Friday, and I appreciate everybody's help, and we'll keep moving on, and have a good weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, bye-bye.